Well, thank you very much, Heather, and thank you everyone for the warm welcome. So I'm happy to be here today to take you through some of Ampere Analysis's latest data and research into the football media rights landscape in Europe and how some of the wider media trends we've seen in Europe are underpinning those, and then also the impact that that's having on football fans. So to begin with, we'll start with some of the wider media trends and look at how that's attracting increasing OTT investment into the rights landscape. Following this, we'll look at how this has contributed to the more fragmented landscape that we see at present and how this has impacted football fans. And then we'll take a look at some of the things that we can do about that. So what are the solutions to address some of the concerns that football fans are having amidst this fragmented landscape? And then we'll summarize with a few key points to take away. So to begin with, what are the wider consumer trends we're seeing, and how has this affected football rights? Well, what we've seen over the last few years, so this is just a 5-year period, but going back further than this even, but just for the purposes of the chart, the last 5 years we've seen a stark decline in the amount of content that people are watching on linear broadcast TV. And this is across sport as well as TV and film. So the whole content landscape, you can see that here in pink. And conversely, in that same time period, we've seen an increase, an explosion in time spent on subscription services. And in some of these markets, particularly out of these ones shown, France, Germany, and Italy, broadcast TV does still exceed streaming in terms of time spent per day watching. But in other markets, including Spain and the UK and the Nordics as well, we have already seen an inflection point a few years ago where streaming is now the primary source of content for consumers. And this is starting to seep into people's preferences for live sport. So if I can draw your attention to the middle pie chart here, the blue section, just over a quarter of sports fans in the big 5 European markets say they would actively prefer to watch live sport via streaming rather than broadcast TV. And this is especially true for younger fans, looking at the chart on the left. And it's not just these changing media habits and the changing landscape that's affecting why OTT investment might be increasing in sport, but also that sport fans can provide a unique audience to these platforms. So over a quarter of sport fans in the big 5 European markets agree with the statement, I only really care about watching sport. I don't watch many films or TV shows. So particularly for the generalist streamers who also carry TV and film, this can provide a new audience to attract as new subscribers and also reduce churn of the whole subscriber base, due to the nature of sports and football being week in, week out, year in, year out, in terms of people tuning in to watch. And while over the last few years we have seen football rights begin to stagnate in value across Europe, OTT investment has increased during that time. So looking at the blue here, we can see that traditional broadcasters do still account for the bulk of investment, but this has dropped off by around 20% since the peak in 2018-19. And why is that? There's a few reasons at play, but firstly, TV revenues have been under pressure across pay TV, TV advertising, and public license fees, constricting traditional broadcasters' budgets. And on top of that, there's been a shift in focus to produce more original content in competition with some of the big global streamers like Netflix, who are so good in that area. So both of those things have reduced the amount that traditional broadcasters have available to spend on football rights. But during that same time period, we've seen OTT investment in European football increase 5-fold. But even that is starting to slow down a little bit as some of the streamers pivot towards profitability over out-and-out subscriber growth. So they're being a bit more cautious with their content spend. And of course, DAZN makes up the bulk of that investment, mainly due to its La Liga, Bundesliga, and Serie A rights. And it now accounts for the second highest level investment after Comcast or Sky across Europe. And looking at this and the previous slide, that's just accounting for the spend from specialist streaming platforms. So if we also take into account traditional broadcasters, OTT platforms, think of Now TV from Sky, Movistar Plus from Telefonica. In addition, those show that the traditional broadcasters recognize the need to tap into this preference for live sport amongst a section of the fan base and also to develop new revenue streams. If we bring those two together, the kind of streaming platforms from traditional broadcasters and the specialist platforms, it paints an even stronger picture of how streaming is now such a big part of the landscape in football. But while this has increased the pool of bidders for football rights, we have seen even the top leagues in Europe struggle in the last couple of cycles, since we saw major value hikes 2 or 3 cycles back around 2017-18. So Serie A has dropped off twice in a row in its cycles. Ligue 1 has even scrapped its auction back in October. The Bundesliga dropped off a little bit in the last cycle, but it is due to go to tender imminently. And then La Liga and the Premier League have seen modest increases in their most recent cycles. So the Premier League at around 4%. But if we take into account as well that they've expanded the number of games available, value per match has actually fallen as of the most recent negotiation. But even though rights have stagnated a little bit, the entrance of the streamers has resulted in this more fragmented landscape. So there was a time where through one device, one subscription, one channel list, you could easily find all the sport that was available, either on the pay TV platform or through the free-to-air channels. Fast forward. We now have attention split across multiple different devices, various different subscription services, different payments to account for. Some matches might be shown exclusively on a streaming platform. Some matches might be on linear, some might be across both simulcast. So it's a much more complex landscape to navigate. And Ampere's consumer data tells us that in the big 5 European markets, football fans follow an average of 6.5 different football competitions. And this increases to around 10 when you factor in wider sporting interests across the Olympics, rugby, motorsports, etc. So the challenge is to cater for this diverse audience group with different viewing preferences across different devices and different types of service. And so given that we've seen these shifts in media and how this has impacted the rights landscape, how has this affected football fans? Well, as hinted at, the number of services where football is being split across has been growing in many cases. If we take the UK, for example, back in 2014, to access the big 5 European leagues, the FIFA World Cup, the Men's World Cup, and the Champions League, you'd need access to 4 services. So Sky Sports, what was then BT Sport, the BBC, and ITV. Fast forward 8 years, 11 Sports has come and gone from the market. Viaplay has entered, Amazon Prime has entered, OneFootball has taken a small Serie A package. And so that's bringing the number up to 7 as of 2022. Now, of course, Viaplay is now in the process of exiting the market, having sold its rights portfolio to Premier Sports in the UK. And the Premier League has dropped out of, Amazon has dropped out of the Premier League, but has taken up a Champions League package, so that will probably stay at around the 7 mark. Spain has been somewhat constrained with its fragmentation due to players like beIN Sports and Altres Media exiting. But how could these go up or down in the future? Well, looking at the Bundesliga's upcoming rights cycle, the removal of the no single buyer rule. So could that open the door for a global play, exhaustive global or domestic play from an Amazon, a DAZN, even an Apple? Remains to be seen how that's going to pan out, but it is interesting to see how these regulation changes might affect fragmentation going forward. And the landscape, the more fragmented landscape, it has a knock-on effect to the price that football fans have to pay to watch the top competitions. So this chart shows the price required to watch all the televised matches of the biggest domestic league in each market, as well as the Champions League. More broadcasters, higher price. And at the same time, over the last couple of years, we've seen the price that football fans say they're willing to pay to watch all the sports they can access. That's come down by over a third. So price going up, affordability coming down at the same time. And if we can summarize how fragmentation has impacted fans in two simple ways, let's call it cost and confusion. We can see how that feeds into the ever-present spectre, as we've touched on in the previous presentation, of piracy. So over half of football fans in the big 5 European markets say they pirate sport on a monthly basis. This is as high as 2/3 of fans aged 18 to 34. The primary driver we're seeing of that is cost. So looking at the left-hand side of the slide, 42% of these sports pirates say, it's too expensive, I can't justify paying, and we've just seen the price increases on the previous slide. Then looking towards the right-hand side, at sports fans more generally, over a third are suffering from subscription fatigue. I feel overwhelmed by the number of services I have access to, and this is just online services, not also taking into account the traditional linear broadcast offline services, if you will, that they can access. And so part of the issue facing rights buyers, rights owners, production stakeholders is to address these kind of concerns. And with that in mind, what opportunities are there technically and commercially going forward to address concerns such as that? Well, aggregation or re-aggregation in the digital world, where we've had aggregation previously from cable and satellite companies, has the potential to help overcome these cost and confusion issues and other things associated with fragmentation. Think Sky, for example, where you can really easily access your Netflix account, your Disney Plus account through one user interface with one billing relationship. And you don't even need to access those different services manually. You can just search for all the content in one place, and it's discoverable seamlessly. And interestingly, while cost is the primary driver of piracy, as we just saw, young football fans, and particularly young football fans who pirate, are more likely than the average football fan in Europe to be willing to pay a premium for a consolidated sports offer. So although cost is a massive issue, the right package, consolidated at the right price, can still overcome those concerns. And there are also some learnings we can take from some of the pirate sites. Some of them have a very sophisticated offer where they act as better aggregators than fans can get elsewhere for various leagues and various sports. They often have a very sleek user interface and even customer service at the end of the phone. So while there is great work being done against these services, the challenge is to produce a product that is competitive against them in the meantime, that can attract football fans and especially younger fans. That's not to say we aren't already seeing several different forms of reaggregation or distribution partnerships. So in the OTT space, YouTube has taken on a role as a third-party aggregator with primetime channels, and that allows you to access various different subscription services in one place under one bill. Massive news across the pond just a few weeks ago, with 3 of the 5 largest US rights buyers, who account for 56% of the US market collectively, announcing that they're launching their joint service later this year. And even since then, we've seen the other 2 of the big 5 in the US, Comcast and Paramount, suggest they're looking into something similar with Peacock and Paramount Plus. And of course, these 2 do already collaborate in Europe with Sky Showtime across TV and film. Then within the same medium, we've seen partnerships with linear channels being shared across different platforms. So in the UK, TNT Sports channel being shown on Sky's platform. And similar in Germany with RTL showing some live coverage from Sky's portfolio. And then again, within the OTT space, we've seen DAZN act as a strategic distributor for the NFL and FIBA with their direct-to-consumer products. And then within the streaming to broadcast or broadcast to streaming arena, there's partnerships that tell us a couple of things. So firstly, that the streamers recognize that diverse audiences want to watch in different ways. So they need to be at the forefront of where maybe more traditional viewers want to watch their football. And we've seen that with linear distribution partnerships with several broadcasters across Europe. And also that in buying top properties on a co-exclusive basis, or even not at all, and then distributing collaboratively afterwards, can actually reduce the spend per buyer, but allow them to still carry premium coverage. And in addition to aggregation or reaggregation, the value of ancillary content, which we've touched on in a couple of the other talks so far, should also be considered, and how it's packaged as well. So looking at the top bar here, this may not be a huge surprise to see that younger fans are watching live sport slightly less than average, not too much, this would suggest. But what they are doing is consuming all these other things far more than average. So 2 hours a week spent watching highlights, an hour and a half on social media, and similar on fantasy gaming. And what we've seen already is some different novel approaches to short-form content, even recently with WWE and X or Twitter distributing 5-minute wrestling matches. So I'm not saying football can do exactly that kind of thing, but maybe there's some short-form novel approaches to take. And again, going back to the Bundesliga with their upcoming cycle, more flexibility for clubs and partners to share in-game social clips to try and drive viewership of the live event. And that's exactly what it has the potential to do. So looking here again at various forms of ancillary content, and we've got an extra couple of things on here around watching documentaries, buying merchandise. We see a positive correlation with consumption of those various things and the live event. So 18 to 34-year-old football fans on average spending just under 4 hours per week watching live sport as a whole. This isn't just football, but live sport. And then there's an up to a 20% increase in the amount of time spent watching live as we go through these categories up to playing fantasy games. So again, important to engage these fans at present through these various means, but also to help drive the live viewership longer term. And there's also a demand for this to be integrated within the platform that's showing the live rights. So 35%, again, of younger football fans interested in the one-stop shop or the fan destination platform, integrating various things such as betting, stats, merchandise. And we've already seen that with DAZN, who have a merchandise partnership with Fanatics, the global e-commerce leader. They've got betting integrated. They've got a partnership with Daymani, a ticketing and hospitality provider. So fans can access all these various touch points within the platform that is showing the live rights. And then that should in turn improve engagement with the live. And then also with the immersive experiences, 37% agree that they want to see high-tech, novel, immersive experience. So think VR, AR, metaverse related. And we've seen some of that recently as well. So the NBA and the MLB partnering with Apple Vision Pro to show simultaneous matches and various other immersive features within an app. And also with the NFL, with Nickelodeon and Toy Story style simulcasts, even aiming broadcasts at children, so trying to cultivate that fan base when fans are still very young. And the NHL recreating their all-star 3-on-3 game entirely within Roblox. And then, of course, all the better if this can be integrated, not just through TV, but mobile as well. So as we know, in the attention economy, there's all sorts of things vying for people's attention, particularly younger consumers across social, across video games, podcasts, all these various things that sport is competing with. And so you need to be present where they're consuming most of this content. So that brings us towards the end. So we'll just sum up with a few of the key points from each of the sections. So firstly, we've seen football growth somewhat stagnate in Europe, but in that time, OTT spend has increased to account for a quarter of all football rights spend across the continent. And this has contributed to that fragmented landscape, particularly when traditional broadcasters' digital platforms are factored in. That shows how fragmented it is to watch sport across various devices, various different types of service. And the more fragmented landscape has had that knock-on effect to making things more confusing, more complex, more costly for fans at a time when there's cost of living pressures, reducing the affordability and how much fans can spend on sport. And that in turn then contributes more towards piracy. But we can look at various types of solutions, including aggregation or reaggregation, as well as the packaging of various types of ancillary content, how it's all brought together potentially within the same platform as the live rights, helping to engage younger fans, but also drive that live viewership in the longer term. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. And if you'd like a copy of the presentation, you can scan the QR code. Otherwise, come and talk to me later on, and we can get that sent over to you the end of the day or tomorrow. But yeah, thank you very much. George.
Thanks very much, Dan.